Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and I'm here with your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, we're coming off of Father's Day last weekend. How was yours?
Doing well. Father's Day was good. I don't know how I did it, but I stretched Father's Day into an entire weekend. So I had a fundraise charity golf tournament on Saturday. So I ended up being gone with a couple of buddies golfing all day Saturday. And then that stretched over into Father's Day on Sunday. Woke up, watched the F1 race, watched some Euro. Just a solid day. So it was good. How about you? How about yourself?
It was nice. I guess it was not as great as it could have been. We started out with baseball at 8 a.m, which is always a tough start to a Sunday. The boys got boat raced 11-0 in 3 innings.
Okay.
It was a weird weekend in baseball. We can get into that
character.
some other time, but
Builds
yeah,
character.
you got to go through those. But it was cute. The boys got alternate jerseys. They usually get them on Mother's Days and Father's Days when we play. So Mason said Scott's son on the back. Was kind of cute. Anyway, so they do something fun like that. After that, it was just a beautiful day. We went and got food, hung out with the boys. Very relaxing day. We didn't do a lot, but very easy. And I'd be remiss. Let's send a belated shout out to a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. We seem much better at wishing the moms as they deserve on their Mother's Day than we do the dads, but happy belated Father's Day to all the dads out there.
Yeah, when I got a weekend of Father's Day, my wife said to me Sunday evening, she said, "I just want to let you know I would like a Mother's Day redo." After the whole weekend got stretched out to be, she called it the weekend of Daniel all weekend. So, yeah. This morning, speaking of my wife, this morning she really got the blood flowing around. Called me a chia pet this morning. Not sure if you've ever been called a chia pet before. As most who watch the video podcast, I shaved my head last year. I'm growing my hair back, and it is not in a place where I can style it, so I look like a chia pet.
At best, I'm the chia pet before the seeds begin to grow.
Yeah,
there's nothing up there right now, so it's a blank canvas. So,
anyways, my wife is great, and I love her. I just want to throw that out there. All right.
We've got a great show for you today. We are going to do a mailbag episode. We have questions brought to us from the internet and around the globe, I'm sure, by our producer extraordinaire, Sabrina. She'll be delivering us some questions, and Daniel and I will give you our infinite amounts of wisdom, I'm sure, on the subjects and topics and all the answers you were looking for. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
For the first question, how can you stimulate an attitude of inquiry?
It's an interesting phrasing on the question, I guess. I love the idea of curiosity. And we talked a little bit about in the last episode the idea of how do you get people to explore, right? And the idea that technology, that can be one of the motivating factors, is the idea of exploration. So I think, for me, I guess, anytime you can use the technology or your content to pop up ideas of things that people probably aren't always thinking about, trying to make those odd connections between things or highlight things that aren't always super obvious, that's probably the easiest way to sort of stimulate the curiosity in your learners.
And just to hop on that way, and I think curiosity and discovery is super important, but understanding who your learners are, and we've talked about this a lot before, but understanding who they are allows you to put things out there that they'll find interest in. So knowing their interests and their goals and their objectives personally and their career goals and objectives, or what they want and desire, helps them kind of go into the unknown. When you're on the same page, and that all kind of relates back to your company or your team culture.
We've spent a little bit of time on things like social learning too, and there's ways to adapt, and we won't probably dive super deep into this, but the idea of something like machine learning or adaptive learning to help your learner understand that people like them. So if you know something about learner A and you know something about learner B, and you can say they're kind of unique either in their job role or their location or whatever that is, you can say, hey, learner A, learner B liked this when they took it, maybe you would also like it. So there's ways to sort of say others that maybe have similar interests to you or similar roles. You can start to introduce content to them that they might not have thought about in the past, but it's something that others that are like them in some regard also liked. So those are ways I think you can sort of get those creative and curious juices flowing for folks and get them to start to dive down some of those exploratory paths.
So, how do you, as an instructor, motivate someone to take training when they've already written off the training in their own mind?
I like that question. And I'll kind of hop in first here, Scott. I'm a big, being in sales, I'm a big proponent of the don't sell to the unsellable. You can't close the unclosable. Like if someone doesn't want something, they don't want something. In training, it's a little bit different because at some point, there's a chance that this is required of their job, recommended by their leaders, needs to get done, or there's some sort of punishment. So the first part, we always use the analogy of carrot or stick. The first part is you whack them over the head with the stick, figuratively, not literally.
Don't do it literally. That's an HR claim.
Yeah, HR. We don't like those around here. And you have to do it. End of story. So that's the traditional way of thinking. The second way is, and I think that the question may be designed for in the moment, but I'm going to I'm going to take it to place of from a macro or long-term perspective. I think that no matter how good your culture is or your learning culture, there's always going to be training that people don't want to take. But I think that you can overcome that by having a good underlying base and foundation with the intention of your learning and your development and the content you put out. So even if I'm not interested in that content or I'm not eager about taking it, I understand that my organization or my team has my best interests in mind, and the encouragement of my development mind overall. So this is going to be positive for me because my company believes in it and they believe in me, per se.
This is an interesting question that probably could become a college dissertation. There's just so many levels and research and stuff. But so for me, one of the things that is really tough in training that you have to kind of also think through is there are layers to why someone probably has written off their training, right? And many of them might have nothing to do with you. They can be past jobs, they can be poor school experiences, they could be friendship related, that where there's just a dialogue that happens that has kind of forced them to think that way, or maybe have written negatively into the trainings themselves. So like you can be trying to overcome some of those hurdles, which are just going to be long set. And I think with those, the simplest approach is just a constant, repetitive, promotional, recognition based approach to say, look, keep coming into the platform, keep taking content. We're gonna give you recognition and promote and praise you for doing that, and get them to slowly change their mind. It's never going to be an overnight thing. If it's someone that has probably written off the training because of your own prior experiences, I think just constantly changing the thought process around how you approach your training, not letting it get stale or stagnant, and trying to do things in a new way, having that open mind around the way content will come together. So really interesting example of this from kind of a long time ago now is we think about like compliance-based training. We had a client that said, you know what, we know it's not fun. Like we know it's something that everyone has to do, and there is this risk that inherently people will have sort of disengaged from it early. And they said, let's think about how we deliver it differently. Like it doesn't have to be dry just because it's compliance. And they put a game to it, and they made it a bit more fun. And I think they had sort of like an arcade style, pub style game that you'd get at a bar top or whatever, throwing footballs, if I remember right, at people. So it was an interesting way to kind of approach what we have historically said is more of a fun or incentive based training with sort of a compliance based training. And hopefully that starts to change the mindset, even as someone takes it, go, hey, this isn't our normal standard everyday training. And you get some of that word of mouth advertising within your content. So I think there's something to be said too, just for keeping an open mind about how content comes together.
So another topic you guys have had a lot of conversations about is user-generated content. So how do you decide when it's best to incorporate user-generated content?
I think this one starts with the culture of your organization. So, I mean, historically, at least for me, when I've ever had these conversations with our clients, is your organization in a position where you're ready for user-generated content? And sadly, to this point, a lot of those conversations are usually no. Organizationally, there's concerns around how to be used or how frequently be used, and how do you track time spent, and is it really voluntary or not? And all of those are legitimate questions. I think you have to sort of resolve some of that as an organization before you can kind of start to say, okay, we're ready for this. Once you are to that place where you're like, no, our users have insight, we'd like to start to gather that and put that into play and let others have it. I mean, I'm in terms of when, as soon as possible. I think there are great amounts of knowledge in your user base that the faster you can tap into that, the better. Now, with that, I think there are ways that you can incorporate or encourage it, and it's really about quality over quantity. In my mind, that's the message you have to set from a culture perspective. This isn't about just verbally dumping everything into the arena, but can you find ways to promote those that do really good quality submissions over those that are just bored, right? And making something to make something, or making something to get points. If you can differentiate that, that's really probably the key. That's bigger than the when. It's probably more the how to incorporate that. But I love the notion that users can generate content. It keeps your library active. It keeps it changing, and you're getting all those voices of experience brought into the platform.
The idea of user generated content for me is such a positive overall. I think um, when it's best is probably when you have the people or the individual to moderate what's going out there. um, Especially in a training environment or a corporate environment, unfiltered posts into a feed, maybe not necessarily what you're looking for. Although in our experience, I don't find feeds to be abused in any way, or kind of those sorts of information shared abused in any way. But I'm a I'm a firm believer personally that um, creative is subjective. So what I like or don't like may be liked or not liked by someone else, as well, or who may have a different opinion than me. So the more is better, and then have somebody who's a little bit more subjective on it or objective on it be able to just filter through that and let the cream rise to the top. So overall, I think when you talk about incorporating or when it's best to, I think when you can moderate it, I don't think there's it's always going to drive value as long as the content is on topic. Regardless if it's really part of your plan overall, more content is always good. More information is always good. Like we've talked about before, people are so accustomed to seeing a enormous amount of content each day. So having that accessible to them is a good thing. We more often hear, "I want more content," than we do, "I have too much."
Well, and you bring up a really simple thought that I think we don't always address, but and it's tough as an organization. I get it. There's a lot of liabilities and things like that, but have a little faith in your teammates or your users or your learners or whatever you call them to generate content that will be valuable to the community. I think, especially in a work environment, you're less likely to get the things that scare you, and you're going to get more of the things that are beneficial. People have TikTok, they have Facebook, they have Instagram, they've got all of these outlets, Snapchat, whatever else. They've got outlets to do the personal, crazy, wild, maybe even controversial things in the world that they're not looking to do that on their work platform. So I think as an organization, to your point, like you have to moderate a little bit, but for the most part, people will put out content that helps them and helps their peers. And we have rarely run into too many issues of people posting inappropriately, even in community feeds and things like that, where it's very easy to just leave a post. Not to say it can't happen, not to say that it won't happen, but their names are tagged to it and it's part of their work relationship. Most of the users we have a pretty good sense that there's a time and a place for your personal thoughts and your professional thoughts, and your work environment is typically going to be pretty beneficial if you're able to utilize it. And again, set that culture tone that there's a purpose behind it and a recognition program for those that do it well.
So again, another topic we've discussed at length, but so we talked about learning paths and letting learners take control of their own learning journey. What are some tools that are used within the e-learning to make users feel like they actually have control?
I think within content itself, we talked about a little bit in an episode or two ago, I think, with the idea of things like branching content, which lets people make choice. And I think if you can give individuals ways to, again, take control of their learning by actually choosing and having the outcome be varied, that's a pretty powerful tool in my mind. When we talk about things like a typical e-learning, often they're very linear. It doesn't matter what you do, and so you feel like you're kind of forced through that path. But if you can allow for things like branching, that's a great tool to use to allow people to have more control in the outcome of the content itself.
This is an interesting one for me. I don't think it's an overly complicated answer. I think you're right on point with what you said, Scott. I think it comes back to the idea of empowerment and the idea of getting their feedback and allowing them to drive their own objectives and be on the same page as the company overall. And that's inherently going to grow the motivation of the user, which has obviously been a huge topic of ours this past month. And coming off of momentum, those sorts of, I guess, situations where they feel like they can choose the path that they want to go down and they can add on skills and information as they need to, is always going to let them feel like they have control and they're in charge of their growth and their development, which inherently they are. I mean, as a company, you can only help them grow and develop so much. They have to be the ones to do it. I think about that when I talk in sports, even. If we train 3-4 days a week, there's still probably 6 to 7 instances where an athlete is doing something on their own in addition to those 3 practices we have per week and a competition day or whatever. So 70% to 30%, they're in charge of their growth. And I don't think it's any different kind of in an office setting or a work setting.
Okay, question 5. How can you recognize learners' achievements throughout an e-learning course?
There's a couple things that you can do, I think, from recognizing learners' achievements. Obviously, we've talked about gamification before. We've talked about rewards, incentives, points, leaderboards, competition. So I'm not going to beat that dead horse down, but I'm going to go really traditional and I'm going to use the example from my kind of coaching, but also I see it at work with my employees as well. Is just, if someone does something good, just tell them they did something good. I feel like the amount of times, and this is going to be really like down, the amount of times that I hear from people that like they don't ever get complimented. Frequently, they only get told when things go wrong, or people, this is really in left field, but like people, no one's ever told me they believed in me, things like that. Like, I feel like just going up to someone when they do something well and they achieve something, being like, hey, great work. Really appreciate what you did. Awesome stuff. The company appreciates what you did, or the team really appreciates it, whatever. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So, and it seems really little, but it goes down to building a culture. So I had 2 players this past weekend, who decided to go away for a little weekend vacation. And we had practice Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. And on Thursday night, they told me they might not make it back for practice. And I told them a bunch of times, like, okay, like fine, they're trying to make it back for practice. But they were 8 hours up north in Ontario. So they got up early as 2 players and they went and they drove themselves home, and they made sure on Friday they took 2 cars and they left separately and drove home and made it to practice. And I told them, hey, I really appreciate what you did. And multiple teammates were like, hey, good to see you at practice. And I know that's not learning and e-learning and that, but I use it as an example of talking to them about an achievement, because showing that commitment was an achievement in that moment for them and their team. It was an achievement of commitment, and telling them thank you and good job goes a long way for what they're going to do next. And I think that all kind of develops the overall culture of learning for your organization.
And if we want to be a bit more tactical in the answer, that's spot on. If we want to be more tactical in the answer in terms of what can you do within an actual e-learning course or your instructional classroom led or virtual led, one of the things that we do frequently, or we encourage clients to do within their content, is like knowledge checks or touch points within a course that is not just at the end. Did we quiz you at the end, but are we checking your pulse sort of along the way? One, this is a great way to like kind of bolster engagement and get them re-involved and thinking and clicking. But whether it's at the end or even in the middle, when you're doing those knowledge checks or those touch points, providing feedback. So often our clients give us a question, let's say true, false, just for the sake of simplicity, and the answer is true. And all they want or all they have in terms of feedback is correct. Well, that's great. I got the right answer, but this is a great opportunity to instill a little bit more coaching, information, whatever, and say correct. And here's why, or correct. The answer was this because it does this. And by the way, that is this benefit. There are all these little moments that you can give these corrective feedbacks. You can give recognition feedbacks. And again, it can be both ways. If you get it wrong, help coach them on why it was the other way. If they get it right, tell them that they got it right and then reinforce that message. And to your point, while there's good recognition and there's sort of accountability, right? There's the yes, you did it well, or no, you didn't. Sometimes it's that vacuum in the middle of like no real recognition at all for doing an action that can have just as much impact. So the more opportunities you can take to even give small amounts of praise and say, yes, this was what we wanted, or hey, the next time let's do it this way, it helps users understand that one, you're listening and you're paying attention, you're providing that feedback, but it doesn't leave them to their own devices to try to figure out if they got it right, because more often than not, I think in that vacuum, it's seen more negatively. So I say take all the opportunities you can to provide those little tidbits of feedback, whether it's in e-learning content, in the platform, or in Daniel's case, in your day-to-day life.
All right. One last question. So, let's say someone is very motivated after taking some training. How can you, as an employer, provide them with meaningful opportunities to use their newly acquired knowledge in order to keep their momentum going?
I like it. We're bringing back a little momentum from our prior month. We've got motivation in this question. And I will like this one for me is it it is the great stumbling block for a lot of L&D departments is think beyond the moment of training and what comes next. We all recognize probably that it's important to do this, but it is really hard in your day-to-day job to think this way. I think because you are handed a checklist of you need to get compliance training A out, you need to get motivational training B out, you need to get process training C out, and you rarely have that moment to think like, okay, I'm going to get this content out and then what? And it's a really important part of your planning process to identify that training is going to happen in a singular moment, but someone is going to leave that training feeling energized, feeling motivated to go out and do their job, to act differently, to behave differently. And you need to have a support mechanism in place that allows for that. Now, that could be something like coaching and mentoring opportunities would be one way. Is leadership bought in to reinforce your message? But it could be follow-up trainings. Are there a subsequent set of stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 for these content components that allow you to keep building on what you learn and keep engaging with that content? Is there sales tracking or something that is going to go into like a contest or a promotion or a report that is just, a scorecard, if you will, that lets people sort of almost gamify their job to a certain degree by saying, look, if you act differently and you perform differently, you're going to be able to do these things. I think there's a lot of ways to instill some of those moments of reinforcement, but it starts up front. Can you plan for that ahead of time? Are you going to set that aside as part of your objective as an L&D department?
I think whenever any of us enter into a learning experience, whether we go to a conference, we take a webinar, we have some sort of training internally, there's always, like Sabrina alluded to in the question, there's always momentum coming out of it. You're always pretty pumped up. You're excited. You're just like having a good practice in sports or some good session. There's always that momentum coming out of it. And I think planning ahead of time for that momentum is always a thing. So I know that when people go to conferences and they hear keynote speakers or motivational speakers, they always get super pumped up and like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then like the next day comes around and they don't do it. And then what it comes down to is like, can you give them the opportunities to express those things to their peers? So I know internally, like we do teach back sessions. If someone goes to a conference, allow them to come back, present what they learned, things they liked about what they heard, not necessarily things that are directly applicable to their role, but things they liked and enjoyed and motivated them and allowed them to teach back. And if they go somewhere where they can make decisions about, um, you know, improving their workspace, improving their team, improving their process, allow them to come back and be like, hey, what are the takeaways that you took from this that you'd like to implement within our team, and how do you think they would help us, and allow them to contribute. I think it goes back to the concept of empowerment. If you empower them to take what they learned and put it in their day to day, it's going to allow kind of the satisfaction and momentum to continue on. And then also it's going to allow them to encourage others to go to similar trainings like that, and also want to go to others in the future.
It's interesting as you're answering it, and I gave my answer, and not having maybe given these a pre-read, if you will. This one question ties back to almost everything, every other question we've had today. Mm-hmm. So things like recognizing an individual for their achievements can also be seen as giving them feedback on things they can do coming out of a training. Are you giving them tasks like write down 3 things you'd like to do with the information you just learned? It doesn't have to be documented in your platform, but it gives them an activity that lets them kind of put thought to paper and then act on those things. We talk about the idea of having control, like we're giving individuals an opportunity to take what they learn and put it into practice. The idea of user-generated content, Daniel just brought it up. Give your individuals an opportunity to teach back to their community on what they think was important or how they perceived that training. This is a great opportunity to incorporate that into your learning. Changing mindsets, giving them control and power and feeling a part of it, engaged. I think all of those things that we've been talking about in this whole podcast are really nicely summed up in this one question, that it's how you take your momentum forward. And there's lots of ways both the L&D community can contribute to letting a learner understand that, give them tips and tricks as well. There's a lot of ways a learner can feel motivated and engaged to go back and engage with their peers. And then, they can feel recognized for their contributions. So I think this is a great question for us as we wrap up our episode. Okay, who doesn't love a great mailbag episode? Lots of good questions. Hopefully our answers give you a little insight and help you think a little bit about the way you would like to incorporate some of those topics in terms of motivation, momentum, things like that, back into your content as an L&D professional. We really enjoy these episodes because it helps us kind of think on the fly a little bit, and dialogue through some of these things. But that will do it for our episode on our mailbag questions. But we wrap up every episode with a positivity point. So we want to get happy with a little something that brings us energy and joy. I will go first today. I think this was actually a positivity point from about a year ago. And I always hit this kind of point mid-June where I recognize it as I sit down with the boys at night. And we decide what we're going to kind of watch as a family on TV or whatever. I love this time of year because there are so many sports going on. And I think it's also important to recognize that a year ago, life was in a little bit of a different place. And I think we felt that gap. But right now you've got hockey playoffs. You've got the NBA playoffs. You've got College World Series for baseball. You've got MLB is in full season. There's soccer happening right now. Daniel I don't know what soccer's happening, not my world, but Daniel can tell us all about it, I'm sure. He mentioned F1 racing on Father's Day. I think you have this abundance of activity happening right now if you are a sports fan. And we are slowly getting back to even the idea of, if you're not a sports fan, we're getting back to where new content is happening in sort of a TV realm. I'm not sure TV exists anymore, but it's more streaming platforms. But, whether it's Disney Plus or Amazon Prime or Hulu, whatever you're watching, there's a lot of great content finally coming back out or releasing. And even movie theaters here in the U.S. Opened up, and we're starting to even see some movies. The options are limited because people have been making movies for a while. So there's probably going to be this gap period until we get a lot of new stuff coming out. But there were things that were put on hold. I'm just excited for all the content coming out. I find that I missed it in the last year and a half. So right now, though, sports and the boys, that's what they want to watch. And having lots of choices and options lets us kind of flip between channels.
Awesome. I think that's great. I'm going to stick on the sports theme, and I'm also going to stay with the theme of this past month of motivation. So this past weekend was also the U.S. Open. And John Rahm won the U.S. Open. And when I talk about motivation, 2 weeks ago at the tournament he was playing in, he was leading by 6 strokes, and he had to withdraw from the tournament due to COVID protocol because he tested positive. And he was able to, finish his protocol and get all the necessary things done so he could compete this weekend. And he ended up winning, which I think's, that sort of unfortunate circumstance, which was like a $1.4 million mistake 2 weeks ago, not a mistake, but he got sick. And now, he was able to bounce back and be motivated. But I think the bigger part of this story, which is why I included it as my positivity point, was the story of John Rahm and his wife and his son, around Father's Day and the course they were at, Torrey Pines, which is in San Diego. They met just around the corner there when they were both in college. They got engaged at Torrey Pines. He obviously had his son recently there, and it was his very first Father's Day, and he won the tournament. And I think it's just all those things combined, it makes that moment for them at such a memorable place, memorable occasion, being your first Father's Day, just such a positive moment. And it was one of those things, seeing them embrace each other on that day was pretty cool. Seeing them, shed some tears in the press conference. It was all really great to see.
Oh, and it was a really cool visual as he walked off the 18th green, as his wife was there with his, infant son, and she hands him over, and he gets to walk back to the clubhouse on Father's Day with the lead, and holding his son. It was just a very cool moment. I can't imagine something cooler to do on a Father's Day, honestly. So very positive for sure. All right, that will wrap it up for us today. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendonca, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.